Cooney, our board approval for the first motion.
I move that the Board of Education award the 10-year life safety survey work for summer 2016 to Archon in the proposal price of $128,000 plus reimbursable expenses.
Second?
Second.
Any questions? Nope. Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha?
Yes.
Mr. Rickes?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Second motion, Richard?
I move that the Board of Education approve the Head Start continuation grant application for submission.
Second?
I'll second.
Any questions? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha?
Yes.
Mr. Rickes?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Claudia? Third.
I move that the Board of Education approve the Head Start self-assessment report.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Cartha?
Yes.
Mr. Rickes?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Ms. Quattrocki?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. If there's no further business to be brought before the full board, I find this meeting adjourned.
Wow. You're no joke.
That was your best meeting ever.
I'm getting good at this after 3 years.
Top that, and that's not gonna happen. Okay. So, you want to call to order? I'm gonna now convene, the Finance Committee will now convene at 7:12 PM on April 11th. 2015. The first-
16.
2016, sorry. The first thing we have on our agenda are the minutes. So the Board Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the March 11th, 2016 Board Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented.
Second?
Okay, I'm going to take a vote.
Ms. Chow?
Yes?
Mr. Rickes?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Next item is our food and nutrition service fees. I'll go ahead and read the motion and then we can take discussion if there are questions. The Board Finance Committee recommends that the increase in food and nutrition service fees be presented to the full board on April 25th, 2016.
Second.
We want to take, folks, I was thinking maybe folks might have questions before we
Yep.
take the actual vote.
Yep.
Jordan, can you just summarize what the ask is for the fees as the increase?
Sure. We're asking for a quarter across the board, so that's breakfast, lunch in the elementary, lunch in the middle school. Oh, sorry. And then we did provide a table of just sort of local districts and what their current pricing is. It has been 3 years since we increased lunch prices in this district. And then at the bottom, I offered if participation remained the same, how much additional money that would bring into the district, and that is $25,300.
Are there any questions about the proposal?
I guess it's really not so much of a question as that we're not losing money now, right?
In what respect?
In any respect. I mean, is this done to cover losses that we're currently incurring, or is the increase just to bring us up to parity with other districts, or is it to?
I think
I'm not
both.
quite sure on why.
I think both, because the program currently does not pay for itself.
Okay.
There is approximately 300,000 deficit, and also bring the prices in line with other school districts. So I think we're trying to do both.
Okay, but this is the pricing presented here, you said would probably yield an additional 50,000, so that means we'd still be a quarter.
About 25,000?
25,000. So then we'd still be $275,000 in the hole
Yes.
relative to our costs. That was going to be my first question, is what are the costs because it does seem to me, and not that I want prices to be higher, it seems to me odd that we're pricing the lunches for full price lower than what we are reimbursed at. Why would we price our own lunches lower than what we are getting reimbursed at, which already apparently doesn't cover the full cost? So I
I
actually.
mean, if we, and I had the same question about what our total costs are, and hearing that, you just think about the amount of people resources that we could use if we had an additional $275,000. Like, do we want to spend it on food, which is important, or do we want to, because this is a real choice, or do we want to allocate that to other types of resources? I didn't realize that we were losing that much money.
Yeah, and we
That's
started
significant.
losing revenues a few years ago with the à la carte revenues, also with the a smaller number of free and reduced children. We lost some federal revenues, even in comparison with last year. We are getting, right, Jordan, about 10,000 per month less in federal funds, and we have more kids bringing lunch from home. So the number of paying kids is only about 11%, you said. So the amount of money that it's basically shrinking. And again, it's outside of our control primarily because of the free and reduced data and just the trend, what's happening with students bringing lunch from home.
Do we have any thoughts on how to increase participation in lunch from like full price paying
Yeah,
students? Because
I
it seems
mean-
like that might be something that is worth looking into.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying every year to do that. Paid has always been difficult in this district, and it has remained steady. The decrease really happened when the new Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act came into play, and we had to make some not major, but some changes in the nutrition standards of the food that we offered. So, yeah, definitely. We're constantly trying to increase participation across all sectors.
So Jordan, though, if we're looking at a reimbursement, so if we're getting reimbursed at $313, what is our actual unit cost? Is it is it higher than that reimbursement for free lunch, or does it cover the cost of free lunch? I'm just wondering where the losses are coming from. Are they coming from Are they coming across the board? Are they coming because we are subsidizing the free lunches?
Right, no. Would you say 200 or 300,000 isn't annually, that's right, that's what's accrued
Right, no, yeah, I
total.
understand.
So we have, I do think we are covering the cost, but we've had to make some capital purchases when we bought the fruit and vegetable carts. We've bought steam tables. So some of that is where that money is coming from, where the deficit is coming from. But food cost is, we spend about $1.25 on food, and then there's labor and overhead and those kinds of things, paper supplies.
On an actual per meal basis, if you figure in our ongoing costs, not sunk costs, not costs that already happened, but are we breaking even on a per unit basis going right now?
Yes,
We do break even.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So that's different than I thought.
Yeah, that's
Thought that we
different,
were having
yes.
an annual $300,000 deficit is much different than we made some investments, right? To move forward. So, okay. So the break-even cost then, it would be good for us to understand the full unit cost per meal, so we know how that compares to what we would get reimbursed for.
Sure.
And then how it compares to what we price our meals at.
Sure.
And I would think that if the 313 is actually the cost and we're getting fully reimbursed for that, then we should be pricing it at 313.
Right.
Or, not that 313 is a nice round number, but 315 or whatever like that. I don't think we should be underpricing our price lunches, I guess is
Right.
for those who can pay.
Sure.
And I don't know this may shift whether we can make a decision about this today. Is there, but I don't know how others feel.
I agree.
I'd rather get some more information and make a
and-
decision.
And it's not that this may end up being wrong, it could possibly be right, but I feel like even just in the 10 minutes we've been talking about it, there was maybe a little bit of misunderstanding. And so I think just laying out exactly all the numbers, many of which Candace has referenced, so that we know, and maybe you have certainty right now, you can say, what you're proposing is exactly the amount we would need to charge so that we're covering our costs for this program. And if you have that answer, that's great. Do you feel like you have that level of certainty?
I mean, I think it would be better to come back with firm numbers.
And is there any, I don't see, is there any ramification of us
Bringing it to the board as a
not making
whole.
this decision until
May.
the next month?
No.
Okay.
Because this is for next year.
But can we bring it to the board meeting? Is this part of the board meeting on April 25th?
I'm wondering if we have information we could share through Dr. Gorin out to the board, we could,
Yeah.
So this could be, it could be, either be tabled now and brought to the board with, by that time, some additional information. The board could choose to vote on it on the 25th, or it could leave here with the direction to change it, update it, get additional information to the board for the 25th.
Yep.
So what would be the downside just to pushing it to the next finance meeting? Do we need to start sharing information out, I guess is the question. Because I don't know that I don't know that we need to add more onto the 25th
Correct. I
agenda.
I agree.
I think
It
it
would
would
be
probably
late
better just to
because-
have it
right.
come back to this meeting. It would be great if you could share the information out if you have it in advance, but then have the vote come.
So do we need, or do we need a decision by the end of April, or can we push the decision to May?
No.
Okay, fine. So
Okay, so we because it's a working meeting, if it needs to be approved then, because it has come before the board, although it has come before finance, do we can we make a decision in the working board part of that meeting on it? Because finance has seen it, but even though we haven't recommended it. Yeah. Okay. All right, so that's,
At the next finance meeting.
Next finance meeting.
And that's easier for all of us.
okay. And Jordan, are you clear on kind of what we're looking for?
I would like more direction on what you're looking for, yeah.
So I think what we're looking for is to really understand the per meal cost. I don't know how à la carte figures in, whether there's reimbursements related to that. That might be a separate issue, but for the core meals, both elementary and middle school, what is the cost? So that would be all in cost, meaning the actual food costs and labor costs to produce each of those meals. And then so we can compare that to where we're pricing it. So a fully allocated cost, I would say, but not including any investments that we've made in capital, so an ongoing per unit, a marginal cost, basically. What is it
What's the cost to
create each meal and serve it?
Right.
So, and
That
just
makes
to be
sense.
clear, as you added that and serve it, we wouldn't be rolling in lunchroom supervision costs, right? Because
No,
those would be occurring
different.
regardless of someone
Regardless,
buys.
right.
Okay,
So this is just for,
just to clarify.
yeah, but the servers of the food, not the
Yeah.
supervisors of it,
Yeah.
yes. And then that way we'll be able to see how different that is and what we're pricing it at. Okay.
The other thing I would look at is when, the last time we did raise the prices, there was talk of there being a fall off because of the price increase. So we should look at where that happened. Was it just the free and reduced? Because in my memory, it was also the paying that there was. So if you did an abrupt increase, you might lose, and it might not actually, it would
Not
be
make
a
any
wash
money
in
for
terms
us,
of
right.
what you
Right.
compensate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Thank you. So if we've tabled that, then let's move to our next agenda item. Which,
Do we need to do something with that motion? Since we had a motion and seconded, we probably need to. Okay.
okay, so we'll hold the motion and table the discussion until our next working board finance meeting. Thank you, Richard. Motion went out into the air. Okay, so we're next going to talk about building use agreement for summer 2016. And the motion is the Board Finance Committee recommends that the building use agreement summer 2016 be presented to the full board on April 25th, 2016.
Second.
Got a second. Are there questions about that?
I had just one question on this, just looking at the chart, and I was wondering how many of these organizations on here are actually organizations that would have to sign this agreement. I mean, it just didn't seem to me like there were very many here that, it seemed mostly like that they were our organizations or organizations with which we routinely work that wouldn't be considered outside use.
I think we have all of our organizations sign this agreement. It does cover if there's any damage to district property, whether it's a city camp where we aren't charging because it's a reciprocal service. So my understanding is all of the users would sign this, but we aren't charging all of the users.
Okay.
Yep, I think the majority of on my packet, page 101, most of those groups would need to sign.
Okay.
Sign, not necessarily pay.
Right.
Okay. Do any of these groups have to pay?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. That's a big question for.
We don't charge the city. We have an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Evanston and Skokie to use our buildings, and they provide services in exchange for that intergovernmental agreement. YOU, we're currently not charging for building use.
So would Good Sports be paying?
Good Sports does,
would pay.
yes, they do.
And Safety Town?
Safety Town?
Yes.
Skokie Park District?
Skokie, no, we have an intergovernmental agreement.
Okay.
What's a low incidence program?
Yeah, I was curious
It's an
about
incident,
that.
let me find that here, hold on.
Low incidence refers to students with IEPs with high needs. So the incidence of those disabilities are lower. There's a lower level of incidence in the population, but they're higher need.
Oh, okay. So that's a
We can,
special ed, okay.
When there's a lower number of incidents,
Correct.
that means lower number of kids?
I'm sorry?
People?
Lower number of high needs. Fewer kids.
There's a
Fewer higher needs.
fewer
Occurrence of
incidents
the
for
need.
That is just really very jargony to refer
is.
to children as incidences. So we don't have as many kids with really high needs,
Well,
so.
it's actually, I heard it as like the need, not the child. But, whatever.
Well, now we know what SUR
we
says.
can reframe it.
Probably be good,
Okay.
good idea.
It's a term used commonly.
An arcane term, I would say.
One of the things I want to stress too, in the use of our facilities and with our summer partners, John has been working closely with them on issues around safety and responses. Just in the worst case scenario that something happens, we need to have a line of communications between whomever's in our building and those of us who are here at the central office. And so that's been an important part of setting this forward, is actually determining those parameters and making sure that people have the communication lines open to us.
And just out of curiosity, if in one of these programs run by somebody else outside, and if a child is injured, who would bear the liability for that?
We ask for a certificate of insurance from building users, and same would apply for the summer users. So that would go through them. The district could always be named in a lawsuit, but we have tort immunity as a public entity, so we would not be found to be responsible unless we were willfully and wantonly, grossly negligent.
That's a good question.
Okay, then I think we're ready for the vote. To move this to the board.
Section 9, the summary use agreement, section 9, page 1.
Right, yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Great. And then, next we have the King Arts track bid approval, which, I don't think anybody's.
No, you have your own.
Oh, did I? No,
Number
I
13.
I really need an eye check. So can I put these on and then it's too big? Okay, I'm sorry, item 13, there are my contract extension. Can't get my eyewear correct. They're too small or too big. we'll have discussion on this. The Board Finance Committee recommends that the Aramark contract extension for FY17 through, well, this
Oh, it's
shouldn't be
only for FY17.
for FY17, be presented to the full board on April 25th, 2016. So what-
Second.
Okay, second. Now we'll have discussion.
Discussion.
The district has used Aramark for the services of the Building and Grounds Director for quite some time, going back to 1992. And Don has actually worked in the district the entire time. He started out as a custodial supervisor, and then during a change a few years later has been the director ever since. So we use Aramark to provide this service. So Don is an Aramark employee, not a District 65 employee. The benefit of having this contract is that we get expertise from other professionals through Aramark. We have used them as we've done studies on the numbers of custodial staff in buildings, average square foot per custodian. For comparison reasons, we relied upon them when we were looking at some building addition work and interviewing construction managers. They have a lot of expertise in all of these fields, and when we do need to call upon them for that sort of information, we are not charged extra. It's just a benefit of having access to them. They do provide training for our custodians and maintenance staff, as well as for Don Stevenson. They provide the software that we currently use to track job tickets. Let's see, and they've done trainings. They also currently provide mops that are used in our school buildings, as well as uniforms for our custodial and maintenance staff. And those uniforms are written up also and required as part of our current collective bargaining agreement with our custodial and maintenance union. So we are recommending a one-year extension of this contract with the current services being continued, because we will be at the negotiations table with this union in the near future, and we aren't sure if we'll have any changes to that agreement. So we're recommending the current services. The reason we're only recommending a one-year renewal when we've done longer renewals in the past is just based on the uncertainties the district is facing. I did, in the packet, include a copy of the financial projections. We are looking ahead at nothing but deficit budgets starting with FY17, so the 16-17 school year, and we certainly would like flexibility in all of our options as far as services provided in the district, as we're monitoring costs very carefully.
And so for that, this causes a catch-22. We, in order to have a one-year service agreement, we actually have to pay slightly more, but it provides us the flexibility in uncertain times to not be with a 5-year contract, and that's the rationale for why.
What is for the 3-year and the 5-year option, what is the annual cost difference between those and the 1-year option?
The first year out, the 3-year renewal would be $212,719.62.
So saving about $5,000.
About $5,000.
Okay.
They have a CPI increase of no less than 1, so, and no more than 3. And the 5-year is a $205,623.60. So the largest discount is with the 5-year renewal, but then it's a longer term. So we felt under the circumstances, and because of the circumstances, the best option for the district at this point would be to just do a 1-year renewal.
So just playing this out, because I appreciate the responsible approach and not wanting to commit us to something, what other options would we have, and were those pursued for this year as well?
We do have the option, if we can negotiate mops and uniforms out of the contract, we could renew at a lower cost. The estimate was $38,000, but we'd still have to provide our own mops, so there'd be a little bit of an offset there. Uniforms, we might have some savings if we could negotiate it out of a future collective bargaining agreement. As far as providing the supervision, we could look at bringing on our own employee and perhaps having a cost savings in that mix.
I guess we can talk about this because he's not technically an
He's not
employee
an
of the
employee.
district, right?
He's a
I mean, is it,
Well, I guess one of the things this covers both his salary and all these other things that you were just enumerating that we get from Aramark, the
Yes,
training?
yes, including all of his benefits, as we would have benefits if we had an employee, workers' comp, insurance costs, unemployment, Medicare, Social Security, this sort of thing.
But it also covers training, the ticket system and the
Yes.
computer software in case there's something wrong at a school that you can register on.
Okay.
And the mops and the uniforms. And so,
And cleaning supplies, or do we
No,
pay for that?
no, they're separate from
so
this.
if I may, the options, we wanted to continue with the current employee who's done a very good job.
Right.
And so, given that, the one-year contract gives us an opportunity to really pursue what you're asking, which is what are other options? And if there are other options with the current employee, that's great, and that may still be with Aramark, and if not, we'll have to pursue what the other options may be.
Because the way I read this, if we were to try to directly employ someone in District 65 who would be new to the role, it'd be a cost savings of perhaps $25,000.
Not, that assumes no value to these other services. So these other services have some value, but
Correct.
we don't have a clear enumeration
Yeah.
of the value.
That's fair.
But yes, it could be up to 25,000,
You're right.
somewhere less than that, because we'd
And-
have to get our own ticket system.
And a long-time, well-performing incumbent provides services that are also very important for the district. And so we
Lots of
again,
institutional knowledge.
that's
tons.
right. And so that was the,
Especially going to the next discussion, in
Yes.
an environment where we're not going to be able to make any capital investments, someone understanding our buildings and understanding where we're at high risks and,
Yep.
you know, is valuable, right?
Totally agree.
So what we would be wanting to do is, out of this year's funds, we want to pay the contract for next year?
We have it included in the budget,
Okay, and that what you've included in the budget is the 217,000?
roughly, yes.
Okay.
It was a little bit under that, but close enough. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's value to an option, and this seems like a reasonable value to having the option, even though there's some, outright money differences. If we looked at a 3-year, 4-year longer, we wouldn't.
There's value to having an option, but I'm wondering if there really is an option, or if that's not
There's an
just an
option in a
illusion.
year.
If there was an obvious option, wouldn't we already know it?
Well, I think the document says we did ask Don if he'd be willing to come on board. At this time, he's not.
Right.
We don't know what a year will bring. We don't know what our year will bring in terms of our financial situation and other reductions that we'd have to make, or other more difficult choices, because at that point, we are going to be looking at a much more considerable deficit. So we have to have as many open options for fiscal year 17-18 as we can, I guess, is the blunt answer.
That's true.
And we're looking at paying $5,000 for that, because I don't know that I would recommend going to a 5-year contract anyway.
I
Even if we
totally agree
weren't
with
in
that.
this situation,
Yes.
decide ourselves into a 5-year contract. So you're looking at $5,000 on a 3-year contract, which to me seems like less than the value of the option.
And how did you come to $5,000?
That was what Mary had just said. If on the 3-year contract, the differential was 5.
Right, it's about 212,700
212.
for a 3-year, the first year of a 3-year agreement after net discounts.
Does it stay the same all 3 years or not?
No, it goes up by the cost of living.
Okay.
And it's the contract cost that goes up. Pardon me?
And when you say it goes up by the cost of living, is it the same cost of living that we're using?
Except there's a floor of 1%, so the increase would be 1% coming into this year, and then they're looking at nothing more than 3%.
Is any of that negotiable?
That has been in our current agreement, so we've been very fortunate, as we've had low CPIs, to keep this renewal as low as it has been.
Because it seems unfortunate that we have to negotiate with somebody who's not restricted by the same CPI 0.8 that we are.
It's very close. In fact, actually, they did reduce it to 0.9% instead of a 1.
but it is important that it's in the contractual agreement. So
Yeah.
that's already
Yes,
there.
it-
And
yes.
that gives us at least
Cushion.
some limit, some governors or limits on that.
Okay.
I think it's very reasonable.
Claudia, to your question about other options too, I think what Mary was pointing to is we have a bargaining agreement right now that requires us to provide so many uniforms. I was asking her earlier today, I had a nice conversation with our custodian at our school, and he told me, we get way too many shirts. We don't need all these shirts. Why do we get so many shirts? And I was like, well, we should be able to change that, because not that we're trying to, but we actually can't change that right now because it's part of the bargaining unit. But if we were able to shift, something like that, which in the bargaining unit, then we could also shift that in this contract, so we're not relying, because we're paying an upcharge on those shirts, I assume. If it's $38,000 for mops and shirts, I don't know how much is mops and how much is shirts, and I don't.
Uniforms.
I'm the last person to talk about mops and the pants that they don't wear anyway. I mean, they wear pants, but not those pants. So this is going to be a fun one for people to watch. Anyhow, there's $38,000 there that potentially could be negotiated down either by taking some of that internal or,
I know I've said this, and I think we've all somewhat agreed just by the nodding heads, but we're very pleased with the relationship with Aramark. We're very pleased with the Aramark employee. Don Stevenson is a fine employee and does really good work for us. And so just want to make sure that we're clear about that. We're being very prudent. Mary and I had the same conversation several times over on how do we move forward given the uncertainties in the district. And so it's being prudent about that as we head towards what might be difficult times.
I'm not going to talk anymore because I'm going to say something.
You have to, you chair the meeting.
Excuse me?
You have to talk, you chair the meeting.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, not about pants. Does that answer all of our questions?
Answers mine.
Okay. All right, then let's go ahead and take our vote. Yes.
Mr. Ricketts?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Now, to the King Arts track bid approval. So we'll read the motion, and then Mary, you can explain how this is back and what has transpired, and we're all grateful that it has returned on behalf of King Arts. The Board Finance Committee recommends that the King Arts track bid approval be presented to the full board on April 25th, 2016. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
All right. So we bid this track a year ago, and the prices came in higher than the PTA was anticipating. They've been wanting to put a track in for over a year. So we rebid the project again in this year, and we're very pleased that we have a low bidder who, even after being the low bidder, agreed to drop his price a little further to get it within range of what the PTA felt they could afford. We're also very grateful that our architect has graciously agreed to reduce their fees that they would charge to do this project to the $8,000 amount. So the PTA would like this to go forward. We would begin this work in the spring, toward the end of April, and the work would be done the first week of June, but this field would need to remain unwalked on and out of use for the summer. But again, we have summer work planned in that building. We're going to be doing a lot of asbestos abatement and flooring work in the building and a little bit of masonry work. So that track should be ready by the time school begins. Now, the PTA is voting officially tomorrow. They did have a vote last year overwhelmingly in support of this. They expect the same to happen tomorrow. That would be done in time should this go through the Finance Committee for the board vote on April 25th. At that time, they would also have their donation letter coming to the board. So the funds would be there for the track fee.
So just to be, crystal clear, as they say, the district isn't paying any of this project. It's being paid by the PTA generously, and will be a big addition to the King Arts community and to the larger community. But I just wanted to make sure that's clear for folks that come into the conversation, especially in the context of what we're going to be talking about and how little to no money we have for capital improvements. This is a project that our team has spent considerable time, and thank you to you and to Don and to everyone that's been involved, along with Dr. Brown and the PTA there. So it's not like we haven't made an investment in the process, but it has not been enough financial investment. And so I think it's important for everybody to know that.
And I just wanted to clarify that the contract would be between the district and the vendor, so we would be cutting the check, and the PTA donation would come right to us to cover that. So that's how mechanically that would work, and we're covered by their insurance that way.
Yeah, of course. Now, this will be our third running track that we've installed, right? Do these tracks
Yes.
involve any maintenance?
Very little. I mean, they're made of asphalt. There's a line painted on the ends and one in the middle, so kids could be walking in opposite directions. It's no more than an asphalt sidewalk, and we have not plowed them for the winter use.
Okay.
You know, when they're covered with snow, we just leave them.
They don't get potholes like our asphalt streets do?
No, because cars shouldn't be driving on them.
Okay.
If they are, I need to know about that.
It's a good question.
You know, the only thing, I'm supportive of it, and it just raises in my mind the issue of equity, which we know we have with our buildings. I feel like I look at it in two categories. One is the money that the district spends, and, you know, we have to figure out how to try and, in some reasonable way, be as equitable as possible. The other bucket is when it's coming because the parents of our school community have economic access to, you know, put something into their building. And it's just, I don't know what to do about it. I just think it ends up taking it creates more inequities.
Well, I do think it's kind of important to notice, at least in this context, this came as part of, as liaison to King Arts, so been in discussions with them, as their climate committee and their inclusion committee has been talking about what does it mean to be an inclusion environment where all students can participate equally, that this was one way. They have many other ways that they would like to be able to do that. But one way, they do see it as an equity issue for their community and having full access to external, because they have students in wheelchairs that can't go on grass, but would be able to potentially use this track. So I think in this, I totally get your larger point. I think in the context of King Arts, they would see, if they were here to represent themselves, I think they would position it as actually supporting equity in their community. It is a Title I school, so it is unlike the other two. King Arts is a larger population of students that may not have access to this otherwise. So, and I think we're also in some discussions with another middle school that would like to do a community project shoot to do something similar. So, but it would need to be funded more broadly from the community versus only parents. So yeah, it's a point well taken. I think, you know, we have to kind of weigh that as we go.
Go ahead.
I really appreciate this conversation because it's an and. It is King Arts really, and the community there really embracing the diversity of the community and trying to work well. And yet, Richard, your point is spot on. It's we have to think about the other sites in the district. I'd like to, of the many things that are on my to-do list, I'd like to take this on to my to-do list, which is to at least come back, whether it's the finance committee or the board at some point. I'm not going to promise this soon, but I want to get it done soon, which is some sort of scheme of how do we think about equity and how do we think about equity in facilities, even in these harsh economic times. I think we want to keep the conversation going and keep the issue on the table. So I'd like to come back with a couple schemes of what would we want to do if one of our other schools that might not have the financial means from the parent community, how would we actually think about doing some comparable work?
And I'd say too, on the point of equity and PTA fundraising, that's actually something at the at an earlier policy committee meeting,
right,
that we did start that discussion of what do other school districts do and how can we maybe address the issues of inequity in fundraising. I think we're going to try to continue that conversation, maybe pull PTA council into it to get some ideas from other PTAs of what would be Is there a way to have a portion that is a share the pot kind of situation to create a more equitable fundraising pot for the entire district. So that is, I think, another thing that's in the works. So
we can
That's
address
great. I actually think that's probably the getting more at the source.
Right.
So I knew that had come up. I'm glad that it's still alive. And just to your point too, Paul, Mary and team had put together maybe 4 years ago a comparison of some of the core elements across the district. And, we've probably seen this in various iterations, but it just skinnied down some of the maybe top 15 or 20 elements and looked at which schools had some of those elements present and which ones didn't. And it was really with the intention of how do we, for these areas of a school or elements of a school, how do we try to increase equity across the buildings? And I hear within their community, it's increasing equity. And my question was just about across school communities.
Right. All right, any other questions? Okay, take the vote.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Mr. Ricketts?
Yes.
Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Okay, now we can move to our discussion item, of which there's only one on the agenda tonight, but an important one. And this is somewhat of an extension of our last board meeting discussion to delve a little bit deeper into the implications and kind of ramifications of the change in our debt service extension base projections and availability and capacity, and what that means for us going forward. So I'll turn it over to Mary.
Sure. So I've prepared what is a very lengthy memo. I'm going to try and summarize that as briefly and succinctly as I can. Every year since tax caps came into being in 1994, actually when tax caps came into being, the debt service extension base that we fondly refer to as the DSEB came into being. It was the amount that the district was paying back in non-referendum bonds in that levy year. So the district's 65 debt service limit was established at just over $4.8 million. That amount did remain stable until a new law was passed that allowed that amount to increase every year by the consumer price index factor. So the same index factor in which the aggregate tax levy is increased, this debt service extension base is allowed to increase. So we have been using, just as we have in our operating projections, a 2% assumption for growth in the debt service extension base with each levy year. Now, with two lower CPI factors of 0.8 from a year ago and 0.7 from just 2015, coming into the mix, and after conversations with Moody's rating service and conversations with our attorney and our financial bond representatives, it was decided that we should use a 1.5% assumption to match our operating projections, which is something more conservative, more in line with certainly the 5-year average of CPI factors. So the estimate of debt service was reduced from where we thought we would be in 2017 before the 2016 bond issuance. We thought we would, in 2017, we anticipated having $4.8 million left after this 2016 bond sale, and the new estimates from Spear Financial indicate an estimate of $2.6 million becoming available in 2017. So that is a difference of $2.2 million. Part of that is made up from the 0.7 CPI factor of last year, and the rest of that difference is made up in using a lower assumption going forward. Bond payments can extend over a 20-year period, but no longer than 20 years. So with the 2016 bond sale of about $3.7 million, we have maximized what we can access for calendar year 2016, which is going out over the next 20 levy years. And I have a chart I'd like to pass out. So for 2016, with the bond sale, we expect we have no room to issue bonds again this year. In January of each year thereafter, so January of 2017 is when the next available allocation would become available in what would then be the 20th levy year. So in 2017, we would then have access to the 2035 tax levy year. And I am suggesting that we use a much lower assumption than Spear Financial's estimate, and I'm suggesting we use an estimate of $2 million as becoming available for principal use each year, and $2 million is using a less than 1% CPI assumption. Spear estimated if we used a 1% CPI assumption, we would have about $2.2 million becoming available each year, and I'm suggesting we use something even lower than that. So let me pass out these charts that simply were intended to show graphically when various levy years become available, again, by going out over a 20-year period. So I've rewritten the 8-year plan. We can talk about that a little later, using these lower assumptions of $2 million joining us that we can access in January of 2017, and I'm suggesting we not issue bonds for that year, but rather wait until spring of 2018 when another $2 million is estimated to join us. So that would give us an availability of $4 million before we tried to do another bond issuance. And again, those we feel are conservative numbers based on recent projection estimates. So are there any questions on the chart? The green boxes are the years in which those dollars would become available, and again, it's an estimate of $2 million for each levy year that could be used for principal issuance. Okay. I just would like to reference on page 112 of the packet, it's in the paragraph marked 2% CPI assumption estimates, page 112. I have incorrect calendar year dates here. These estimates are for the 2017 year, and the top of the page where we estimated having $6 million available, that was as of January 2016, once that new levy year was able to join us. So the $6 million estimate was for 2016, and the two dates of the $2.5 million joining us, that would have been in calendar year 2017, to bring the previous estimate available in 2017 to $4.8 million. It does not change our bottom line. With our new estimates, we are assuming we'll have $2 million available in 2017. So these were the previous estimates. I just had the wrong calendar years entered there. We did correct it in the permanent record that's on the website.
So I think before we look at the 8-year plan, we should take any questions that we have relative to these projections and, kind of how we got where we are.
Well, one of the things that I'm curious about is if what we're restricted on is the amount that we can borrow. Am I right that essentially that's what we're...
You're restricted on how much we can pay back each year, so yes, how much we can borrow through the debt service.
Wouldn't, if we did a referendum, wouldn't that be subject to the same restrictions?
There are several types of referenda. There is a referenda option to increase the debt service limit. So where we started out at 4.8 million, we could have a referendum question that would increase the annual payments to $10 million, let's just say. And if that referendum passed, the board could then consider, what we would have access to would be a larger number. We would have access to a larger amount of bonds we could sell through the debt service, which is with a board vote, meeting some other legal requirements, posting notices, and we have to have a hearing when we have a resolution that covers the bond sales. So that's one type of referendum, to increase the debt service limit on an annual basis, but that would bring in more money for capital projects.
That we could actually use.
We could use for capital projects. Another type of referendum that could benefit capital projects, including technology, it would be a general obligation bond, so a bond for capital projects. And we talked about that in August of 2014, what projects might be considered for capital referenda. That's another type of referenda question. It would have a larger dollar figure in the question because the voters would be asked to approve general obligation bonds of X dollars. So that would be a larger number than I'm envisioning a debt service increase would be. And then...
So that wouldn't That also would not be subject to those restrictions, the restrictions that the
Well, once you have a referendum, then you're not restricted. If you have a referendum for bonding, there is a limit, and I do have that in the memo. There's a limit, and it's based on 6.9% of our equalized assessed valuation or our property values for the district, less the existing debt. So this is page 115 at the top paragraph under referendum consideration. So if we went out for a capital general obligation bond, we have access to 91 million. So we could sell bonds up to $91,742,695 for capital use. So that is your maximum that would be available through that type of a referendum. And the third type of referendum would be an operating referenda increase. And that would be, that would increase our operating revenues that we use in our operating budget. If we had more room there, we could move more technology expenses, let's say, into the operating budget.
Okay, so the projections that you have for the debt service extension, the chart that you just
Yes,
gave us.
yes.
This is for what we have already, we're already authorized to borrow, except that we can't
This year
because-
or next year.
Yes, we are maxed out. So the top line there is all blue, and we're maxed out in calendar year 2016. So the first we could borrow again against our limited debt service would be in January of 2017. But with a lower, very, very conservative number of $2 million, I would recommend not trying to issue bonds because it would be so tight, and I don't want our bond rating to be impacted. That could hurt our, it would mean we'd be paying more in interest and, that.
You maxed out the credit card.
Right, so if we wait till 2018, we would then have a buildup of $4 million from each of these two untapped levy years. Things are very tight. They were tight to begin with. They're way much tighter under these updated scenarios.
2 points, though, that was right at the end of Mary's point. One is that if we went forward on an operating referendum, we could also we could fund, and we were successful, we could fund some of the projects that we might sometimes think of as capital projects, as long as we're not building a new school.
You're correct. We could do anything short of building a new school out of operating budget, and technology would be the first type of expense I would suggest moving in if we had room.
And then the last time the district was successful in a capital referendum, it resulted in this building being built, and a significant amount of resources being invested into technology. So, and that's 15 years ago. How long was that?
Well, 99, 2000, right?
So part of practice over the years has been to have the technology expenses on our capital side, or on our credit card, if I may, our debt side. The best practice is to move that into an operating side. But if we were to immediately move it into an operating side to free up some monies, then we have trade-offs. And those trade-offs in a institution that is 85% people would have some staffing trade-offs if we were to move those resources over. If we don't have the resources for technology, then we're really challenged to stay at the cutting edge in our classrooms and in our analytic cubicles to be able to have the types of technological machinery that we need because our leases are up and we have a lot of replacement that we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I have a question just around timing, so that we don't, we won't have the opportunity to get into this situation for the next year because we won't be able to issue bonds. But I think one learning from this is that we thought we had $6 million available for 2016, when in fact we had about 3.7, because that's what we issued, and now we are maxed out. So and we didn't realize that until after we already issued that $3.7 million in bonds, if everyone's following me. We thought previously that we had $6 million available in our debt service extension, and that's why we set the scope of projects that we did, and we issued 3.7 to go against that. And then afterwards, we learned that it in fact wasn't 6 million, it was more like 3.7, because the data became available around the actual CPI, and then we adjusted our estimates. So I want to, I guess, challenge the team here to think about, as we move forward, how this sequentially how this all works so that we are getting the most current, possibly current, projections before we're making decisions on what we're going to issue. And we talked a little bit about, you spoke about this in the memo of getting that information in the spring, and the only pushback I have there is if we get information, update information in the spring, we've already made decisions the previous fall, really, about projects. We don't vote on them until later. So we need another round of some kind of sanity check of some sort. Either we think the CPI is going to come in lower than what we projected, or we ask our team, our advisors, to run the numbers again based on any new knowledge before we start planning projects for the next fiscal year, if that makes
Exactly.
sense.
Yes, it does.
I think that would be helpful to help protect us so that we aren't, we don't come up against something similar like
Yeah.
this, because we're going to continue to be in very slim margins. We don't have a lot of room to mess up on estimates, basically.
You are correct. The CPI comes out on January 20th each year, and so we are updating our operating projections in February, and that comes to the Finance Committee. So we can update the debt service extension base available for principal usage estimates every February. We could just bring it whether we have projects planned or not, like we should bring it next year. So we can bring that and just add it on to the February meeting. And then if we have work considered, and we don't have building projects coming on again until summer 2020, so we could do bids for that work in the late fall, because it's really a good time to bid, like November, December. And just make sure the bid price would be held until, approval in the spring. That would be an option.
I think that's right. I think there's one other stage, which Candace is asking, which is to provide the board as decision makers with some scenario analysis. So if the CPI is, let me just use these numbers for example, is 2.0, here's what we would have available. If it's 1.5, here's what we have available. If it's 1.0, and since it's 0.7, if it's 0.7, and to be able to make the best professional guess, and that's something that we can do, but we can also do with good advice and counsel, we can at least give to decision makers, including me, the scenarios that are in front of us so that we can make the best informed decision making on what we know as we're facing these conditions.
Correct. And let me just remind you, the $2 million estimate of rolling on for principal usage is just under a 1% assumption. Our 3-year average for CPI factors is 1%.
So, I think this won't happen, but it would be helpful in that fall, because we start looking at projects in October for the following year. So, we set expectations,
Right.
even though we might not make a decision. So at that point that we're starting to think about the project scopes, we're in more real situation, there should be a plan A, plan B kind of thing. Like plan A would be if this is the projection becomes real, plan B if it comes lower.
Correct.
Richard?
Just, I guess, some comments and questions. The first is, I thought I understood that we could track CPI throughout the year so that heading into January, in October, November, we would have a sense of where CPI was likely to land. Is that a fair statement or not?
We can track things like falling gas prices, which we saw last year. So you can track monthly CPI factors, yes, until the year ends, though we aren't sure where the year
But
will
I
end.
mean, this year was so different, and last year was so different than what we were projecting, that unless something really significant occurred in December, we could have projected before we got final numbers in January that CPI was going to come in
Lower.
under and even well under what we were planning on. And so my point is, I don't think have to wait until whatever the date is in January to have at least an indication of where we expect to land. As I think about it, and the service provider, I'd like to talk about that if we can.
Okay.
I think since I've been on the board, every year, their numbers, at least the last 4 years, have been, their projections for what we should be building into all of our projections, their CPI projections have been higher than what the actual CPI has turned out to be. And so I'm curious, what is the role of SPEAR? What services are they providing to us, and what are we paying them for those services?
SPEAR does provide us with financial advice as far as bond sales. We have gotten information from them about various types of referenda and costs of referenda. They do issue bonds for a lot of municipalities, including school districts, and we have relied upon them for estimates to use as far as availability. I have always brought the board a lower estimate than what SPEAR has told me is available, so I've reduced it a little bit before I'm bringing it to the board, just to be conservative. So I've always tried to be conservative with numbers that they're giving us. But so they do. They broker bond sales for us. I would have to look up exactly what fees are charged.
And I know there's always a variable transaction type of fee. Is there a fixed fee that we're paying to them for the relationship?
No. We just pay them when we do bond sales. So when they've provided information for referenda planning, that's at no cost. And they do some debt disclosure filings for us that are now required as part of our tax levy with all the bond issues. So they do that, and we pay a separate fee for that. But when they have talked with us about referenda and given us cost estimates related to that, there's no cost for that sort of a service.
And, well, I guess two questions. I don't expect you'll have an answer to the first one off the top of your head, which is, do we have a sense of what we have paid them for any of the work they've done over the last few years? I would just be curious about that. I know it's always embedded as a line item in the total cost to issue bonds.
The bond issuance fees run about $200,000.
Okay.
That was the estimate. That was the estimate. And I could look up what the fees were, because I think I recently saw that after the sale or in the final documents. I'm sure I could get that. I don't know it at this moment.
And how long have we been using SPEAR?
We found their name going back to 1994, so I don't know if they were with us any earlier than that. I couldn't find any documentation.
So others may agree or disagree, but I would be curious to see what other service providers might have to offer.
Are we on a contract with them, or this is just purely?
It's a relationship. It's a relationship.
If it's been 20 plus years, I think I have some questions about what they may or may not be providing in terms of value to the relationship, and I think it would be worth exploring.
Yeah.
I don't know what others think.
I agree.
I agree as well.
And Mary and I have already discussed that, and we'll do a full faith exploration, including working with the SPEAR colleagues and seeing what they provide, and then other providers in the marketplace.
Do we happen to know who the high school uses, if they use SPEAR or something?
I could check. I'll call them and ask.
A nice opportunity to.
Or some of the other school districts like us around.
Right.
We can certainly find out who other districts in the area are using and bring back some different options.
Okay, so we'll bring that back at a later date after you've had time to do that due diligence. Are we ready now to move on to just looking at the impact this has on the 8-year plan then? And that's on pages 120 and 121.
So in the previous 8-year plan, we did have building projects on each of the summer lists, which we have taken off the updated list. So we show, and I don't even have specific projects here, we show capital building projects starting again in the summer of 2020. So we'd have 3 years without funding for capital building projects, and the estimate we're showing there is $1 million. It goes up to 1.2 million, back down to about 1.1. The projects, while they're not specifically listed here, right now, in the most priority projects include roofing, masonry, and heating systems that we are monitoring. We do have our roofing and masonry architect come every year. He's been coming for a while because we have delayed some of our roof and masonry work. So he comes every year anyway to assess our roof and masonry in the district, and will continue to do so to provide us updates on how things are going. We have done small scope replacements and small scope masonry work here and there, and will continue to do so in the hopes of keeping our buildings up and functional. And actually, we have the life safety survey going on this summer, and we've had a mechanical engineer look at our heating units as well. So
I find it somewhat ironic that we're having the life safety survey done, and what if that turns up something? I mean, isn't it
it's very likely to, and we asked,
critical? And we have no plans to address that. We have not even a placeholder for it.
well, we did a lot of work after our last life safety survey. We had boilers that were like 80 years old, so they've been replaced. There's been a lot of updating since that time, which was funded through the debt service extension base. So certainly codes may have changed. There may be things that they find, but we're not aware of any critical concerns. We do have, as I said, some air handler units we're monitoring, not in every building, just a few that are more on the older side, and we've replaced parts in them to keep them up and running. So I'm curious to see what they find, but I'm not aware of any drastic concerns in our buildings.
One question of clarification and then one question of substance. Clarification, if the CPI changes, do these numbers change?
Yes, yes. If the the $2 million estimate, I mean, if the CPI dropped to 1, that's already below 1, but I would probably suggest we conservatively take it down to something less. If the CPI factors go up in any of these years above the 1.5% assumption, we would have additional new money rolling in for that levy year and then carrying forward and compounding. And we'll certainly monitor CPI trends as well, which is a very good point.
And you know, it's interesting, it might be useful just as part of the FYI to indicate how CPI is trending for the year.
That's
Just
interesting. We can-
month by month, so that we're all aware. And it's not that we have to have an in-depth conversation, but it could just be part of the
We can do
standing
that.
information.
That's a good idea.
That is good.
That way the public is aware too.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
My
a very good
second
point.
question was, and perhaps it's for you, Mary, or for you, Stacy, in terms of given that we've been supporting our technology on our debt service, what's the impact of this plan vis-a-vis technology? And I don't know if, Stacy, if you want to.
I can go ahead and talk to that a little bit. Technology will come to the next Finance Committee meeting to share a bit more on that impact, but the shift in both the reduction of $400,000 as well as as not looking at leasing going forward really does have a very negative impact on technology. When we take a look at our demand currently, we know that we have teacher machines that are in their 5th year next year and due for replacement, and we also have very significant numbers of machines that are in student circulation that are already past replenishment cycle. With this current scenario, we have very limited purchasing for next year. We have to make it our priority to basically do break fix, and that leaves us with about $250,000 to purchase any additional technology for next year. The following year, we don't have a resolution on that yet, because based on the funding of the $400,000 as opposed to $800,000, we're about $250,000 in the red without purchasing. So, we are revising our long-term plans and trying to figure out, any reallocation of funds that we can do with the remaining funds from this year to pre-purchase, and then really what commitments can we make going forward. We know that the biggest things that we'll need to address immediately would be teacher laptops, and then we currently have the Digital Promise program, which is one-to-one at Chute and King, which Digital Promise is moved to a 3rd year, which allows us to continue with that program next year. But if that program were to be maintained, we'd have to make a commitment of putting iPads in the rising 5th graders or rising 6th grader hands the following school year. And currently, we don't have a financial plan for that. Those are 2 examples of, things that we would need to grapple with in the short term.
Do we not keep the iPads? So they're the property of the students? and not-
No, the iPads do belong to the district, but 3 years of an iPad in a student's hands is basically the life cycle of that machine.
Wow, really?
Yeah. It's, the life cycle of an iPad in students' hands is 3 years, and the life cycle for iPad within the school is 4 years. And then there's there's a certain window of time of which Apple will maintain the iOS and continue to do updates. And, so even if we can keep that machine running, there's a point where we can't continue to do software updates and run current apps, things along those lines.
Because the Chromebooks, they're doing 4 years at the high school, and I hear those break down a lot more than the iPads, so I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, and we've been in communication with the high school around Chromebooks because we have a very significant investment in Chromebooks as well. And we would have planned to do a wave of replacement around the Chromebooks at the end of this year to go into next year that we will not be able to do at this point. So what we will do is we are currently evaluating our existing machines, including a set, we've got student MacBooks that would have also been replaced. And we'll basically work to keep those items in circulation as long as we can. And I'm working with the technology team basically on kind of a decision-making matrix of when is it that we do the repair and when is it not worth it financially to do that repair, and what will we do at that point. And so in some cases, the instance of the student MacBooks, the volume of machines on those carts will simply decrease. With teacher machines, we're going to see what we can do to pre-purchase and try to keep certain things in circulation until we have a resolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I don't know, I'll put this out there, as a bare minimum, we need to make sure our teachers have the tools that they need. And I know there'd been some talk of potentially shifting that resource, but it seems to me that a MacBook is a minimum.
Okay, yeah, and we're currently...
Others have opinions, but I don't think it's feasible that a Chromebook could be used for a teacher, nor should we have even used for a teacher.
We had absolutely made the assumption that we would be replacing teacher computers without a doubt. We hadn't decided what what device it would be, or two, necessarily how we were going to pay for it and over what duration of time that replacement could take place. But we view it as being a vital tool for doing a teacher's job, without a doubt.
Do we outsource repairs, or do we have the capability within?
The vast majority of repairs are done in-house. We have a pretty capable team that does a lot of the work in-house. In the case of, shall we say, major system failure and or damage, we might outsource on that, but the vast majority are done in-house.
Well, thank you for that, Stacy. We'll look forward to getting more the details next month.
I have a question.
Yes.
Because as Claudia just stated, the idea that we have no capital projects slated until 2020 that doesn't sit right, especially when we do have all these technology purchases slated. And I'm just wondering, I understand the difficulty for next year. I understand overall the difficulty in shifting technology into our operating funds, into our operating budget. But are we going to come up with, or are we going to see at some point a plan to figure out how we can more aggressively start phasing technology into operating, and what that is going to look like, and if that could free up some money for capital improvements earlier on?
We're going to have to face trade-offs.
Understood.
And if we look at the rest of the package.
But right now, we're making an assumption that the trade-off is technology versus roofs.
Well, but we have to then make that even more complicated. The trade-offs are, if you look at the potential deficits for next year, which we believe we'll be able to address, is about $500,000, and then it's $5 million, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
At that $5 million point, negative $5 million point, we're going to have to look at technology. We're going to have to look at some of the capital expenditures we can do through our operating budget, and then we're going to have to look at the support of the people who work in the system.
Right.
And so therein lies our budgetary arm wrestling that we're going to have to do.
I think what I'm hearing SUNY say, and maybe this is under the auspices of our budget development process for 16-17, as we look to that process, if we lay out a scenario, which is, here's the budget development process to get us to break even for 16-17. We know we are already going to have to make a $500,000 in reduction. This is what that looks like based on our priorities. If we were to pick a number, not necessarily the whole amount, but if we were to shift some substantive amount over to operating in that same year, then what would that next level down of reductions have to look like? We know we can't make personnel reductions at this point, given our bargaining units, but, so what would that cut be? So that we could at least, so we could see what the trade-offs are, and whatever level of granularity is possible, but just as part of a scenario for the budget development, I think that would help SUNY, Jennifer, all of us understand, this is where you would recommend that we would make those reductions, and then we can say, wow, well, you know.
Right.
Whatever that is, we're going to stop transporting students or whatever, then to pay for $400,000 in technology, then we can at least be making the choice to keep it here with the knowledge of what the trade-off would be if it were in operating, if that makes sense.
I think just one point to raise, the current technology funding this year, and Ray, correct me if I'm wrong, is about 1.5 million. And so there is also already a very significant step down.
Yes, right.
In the funding that's allocated to technology prior to even trying to move anything additional out of this plan.
And you're correct, and that's because we had larger leases that we were just showing them phasing out. So we've allocated funding for those leases, but not the replacement of the lease value.
Right. And none of these expenditures in technology were to ramp up order of magnitude, any other than if we were to continue to sustain Digital Promise, which is a choice, and that's a programmatic choice. I think that it sits somewhat in a different bucket than maintenance, which all of this is maintenance. And we can question, the timing on maintenance, but pulling it back anymore means pulling back the current level of technology support that we have in the classrooms, correct?
It would be decreasing the amount of technology available to teachers and students, yes. And you're right, the one program that creates a deeper level of saturation around technology is Digital Promise. And currently, that is funded by Digital Promise, with the exception of some of our support services.
Right. Okay, so is that a fair ask as we go into budget development?
I just have a clarifying question about the life safety. I know they give you different, either you graded it or they did A, B, and C in terms of the urgency. What kind of timetable do they give you for the most urgent?
Sure. We did ask, pardon me, we did ask the architects to kind of prioritize the projects that were identified in the last survey. And I think we had urgent, recommended, and urgent, required, and recommended, or something like that. We are not on the hook to do any life safety identified work and there are districts that can't afford any life safety work. We are obligated to have the 10-year life safety survey. Wow. So what we have to do
is spend the money for it too.
And we did ask, could we delay the survey another year? And the Cook County North Cook Regional Office told us, no, we can't delay it. We have to get the survey done. So each 10 years when we have surveys done, we're going to have more projects identified. And we did take care of a lot of the projects in the last. I think we have some old galvanized piping still in many of our buildings that we just left. It's not problematic at this point. But anyhow, so projects will be identified. We won't seek a life safety amendment from the state until we have funding in place to do those projects. And the only advantage of going for a life safety amendment is we could use life safety funds, but our life safety fund has a balance of $50,000, $80,000. There's no money sitting there. We have to levy money through the tax cap levy. So that with districts that had more life safety funding or where they weren't under tax caps, as some districts in the southern half of the state of Illinois are not, it would be advantageous to have an amendment so they could levy money there. But that levy is tax capped. So we are not under any obligation or timeline to complete projects, but we certainly want to know what they are and see, what could we possibly do in-house if it's a larger system, and they may come up with some of these air handler systems, have a timeline in place as to which, I already have that, which ones we feel are the most.
I'm not being facetious here, but perhaps we could say that we will complete the life safety survey when we get a state budget.
Well, but the state budget still isn't going to give us, likely to give us any more funding.
Well, some of the funding uncertainties that we have.
We have a lot, and we don't even have those included in our $5.5 million projected deficit for 17-18. That does not have any pension cost shift. It has no change to state funding. It assumes state funding is status quo.
This does reek of unfunded mandate.
Yes,
yes, it does. Yes, it does.
That we aren't even required to do what the 125,000
It seems
is.
like a poor expenditure of, how much did you say it was?
$125,000.
And what
128.
amount of
It's good for the
dollars-
construction industry.
What amount of dollars that were supposed to be provided to the district have not been provided this year?
Oh, the reductions, the prorations to general state aid or categoricals, what's,
What dollar amount? I'm
yeah,
just-
what, give them a,
Well, for
prorated
for general state aid, it's about 500,000 that's being, that we are not getting. We are getting state categoricals. We actually got,
And who mandates that we have to do this? Is it at the state level?
the life safety thing?
Yes.
That it is state required and it's monitored by the, it used to be the
I
Cook County.
actually don't, I think Claudia has a bad idea.
It's not,
If the state is mandating it and the state, go ahead. I mean, it's just, it really,
yeah,
bite my lip. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say.
rather
the-
irksome.
There's an extremely particular inspector who works for the North Cook Intermediate Service Center who has been out and inspected our buildings, not doing the 10-year life safety survey, but we have regular walkthroughs every year from them, and they can shut our buildings down. So that's the power. The North Cook Intermediate Service Center, if they walk in a building and don't like something, they can say, you can't have kids here. And so that's the risk. We could, very good point.
But
The
they
state.
could do
They could
about
do
whether
that
we
if we
have
have a
the
survey or
the
not.
survey or not, right?
That is true. But we want, if there's an identified concern, we want, which we're not aware of, but we would want to certainly make our buildings accessible and not keep them
But
closed.
the walkthroughs are free, I take
The
it.
concerns.
When the
Walkthrough,
What,
so maybe they could identify things there, and that could be our life, I mean, just.
But we run the
seems-
risk, I mean, it's a crazy unfunded mandate, and we're squeezed to pay. And I just don't think it's a feasible thing to say, we're not going to do it, because then they do have the authority to flick the switch and say.
But we,
shut down
so we
buildings.
think they would flick
They
the
can
switch
come in and
because we
take-
didn't do
they
the
can-
survey?
well, I spoke with this exact inspector on the survey question. Do we have to have the survey done? You know, can we just wait a year? She says, oh, no, absolutely, you would not be in compliance with the law. They used to allow waivers, which they found were not even legal to do so. So she said it absolutely can't be waived, and she is the one who actually was here threatening to close one of our buildings down over a concern that she had.
Which we
And- but-
rectified.
We did, oh, yes, sir, yes, we
That was
did.
actually
Make
one
a
of my
note of
first
that.
days
Yes, that
on
was
the
your
job.
first day on the job. Yes, I remember
We
that.
rectified that.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if we do the life safety survey and it identifies things that we can't fund
Fund.
anyway,
Are you saying they'd have more compassion for us
because we did the survey,
identified it,
even if we
haven't fixed
can't
it?
remedy it?
I mean, I think the point is, we should bring this up with our
With our legislators.
legislators as an unfunded mandate. We certainly wouldn't want to have a critical issue that we weren't aware of. I mean, so there is a piece of that, right? That,
No, of course not.
and we'd figure out a way to address it.
Right.
And while we're on that subject, let me just share this little tidbit. So the district was approved for a state safety grant through the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, IEMA. We were approved for $180,000 a year ago, 2 years ago. For egress, we did some door replacement, we put in some intercom systems, and we did some other, I can't remember, some other improvements. The state has not reimbursed us that money yet. So they said they will not, we've submitted all the paperwork and receipts, but they said until they have a state-approved budget, they're not reimbursing districts. We are one of the larger districts, so that's a larger amount than many districts have. The high school is still waiting for probably about half that amount. And that's another initiative I'd love to see districts saying, you know, this money was spent in good faith, we followed all their guidelines, this was a school safety initiative, and the state has not paid. And we're not the only ones. No district received their reimbursement. So that's the state security grant that hasn't been reimbursed.
Are there other items like this, if we talk about the, reduction in state aid and lack of reimbursement on that, or anything else that falls into this?
Is there anything else? Those are the two big ones.
I mean, it does seem like we should write something formally as a
Yeah.
district to
I
our
agree.
representatives and
And add this
to
to it.
whomever else, and
Copy of
follow,
it.
and follow it up with a conversation, because that's very frustrating, to say the least.
So two follow-throughs at least from this conversation. One is that we will draft a letter very specifically about several of these issues, including the life safety survey. And the second one is to do the budget scenario planning that shows where we are going into 16, 17, excuse me, into 16, 17 and beyond, but into 16, 17, how we're going to get to the $500,000 or so that will balance, and then what happens next in terms of trying to make some reductions so that we can pay attention to technology costs and other costs that we have. That we're happy to do, and we have to do. And then we'll have to see, I mean, our argument is that at the stage that we're at, we're really going to be scraping at the bottom to find the resources that are not personnel oriented, and we'll do what we can do as we move forward.
Great.
All right? Okay.
Thank you. Or, I'm assuming there are no more
well,
questions. You do? Sorry.
It does seem to me, though, that we should perhaps be a little bit more assertive in at least making the general public aware of that this deficit is not, that there's a big state component here, so that maybe people would get more riled up about the fact that we are going forward into our second year without a budget, and this is really an untenable situation. I mean, many agencies have already been ruined, not
Right.
our school district, but other social service agencies have been destroyed because of the situation, and unless we start pushing back in some meaningful ways to them, I don't know what is going to be their motivation to change. It seems a very odd stalemate.
I think it's actually a really important thing to underscore and to be very vocal about. And I think if we look at our colleagues across town in higher education at Chicago State University, if you just read the headline in the New York Times actually now, not only the Tribune, by the end of the month, it looks like they may have to shut their doors.
Yeah.
And so that's a publicly funded institution by the state of Illinois that's not going to have resources. And the worry I have as we represent another publicly funded institution is that in the next budget year or the following budget year, monies may be appropriated, but they may not be distributed. Or they may not be appropriated, or they may not reach that point. And that's part of what we're talking around the table is how do we actually do our own budget balancing to move forward? That's something that we have to be responsible for. And that coupled with what can be a horrible tornado from the state of Illinois is really going to have a negative impact on us. So yes, this is what I'm saying.
And I think there, it's talking beyond our own representatives because they aren't the folks that need the extra push.
And I'm not as well informed on this as I should be, but at some point before the next gubernatorial election, there is a comptroller election, if I remember correctly, because of an unusual situation.
In the fall.
If I understand, the comptroller gets to decide which payments are made first.
Right.
So that is an election that will matter a lot to public education. So it's something we should all be paying attention to.
That's part of the general, I believe, in the fall, right?
Is it in the fall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of the general.
I'm sorry, I couldn't remember.
Yes. All right. Okay, this is sombering, but we will look for next month. We can start, we're having a budget update then, so start this process, I believe, then. And I think we also, as part of that budget update, we'll look to understand just how the new priority-based budgeting is informing this process and how that looks different than maybe the process that we have had in the past.
And again, let me stress that for the 16-17 budget, that's $500,000 that we have to move forward to have a balanced budget, which we're committed to do. We'll go deeper on that. The leap forward to the following year is about $5.5 million based on what our current projections are. That we have some speculations at this point. We're building a plan, but we're also moving forward with all sorts of other circumstances, so we're going to have to.
No, I was meaning a
Let's do
budget
16.
update for 16-7.
Good.
The budget development process for this coming fiscal year, and then having the scenarios for that.
Yep,
Not
we'll be-
in the
I
next.
think it would
Jet.
be interesting, because I was not aware of the fact that we hadn't gotten reimbursed for the work that we'd already done. And as much as possible, if you could
Those
keep
places.
us aware of that, sort of like a state reimbursement watch report or state unfunded mandate report, or both together, I think would be very useful for us. And then it could be something that we could leverage in talking to our representatives.
I agree.
So I think that's in on this discussion. We did have some FYIs in the packet. Are there, and those bridged actually both the working meeting and the finance meeting, I think. I don't know if summer learning project was
Yeah,
supposed to
they
be for
did,
finance. So, but I think we can take questions on either, both. Meg, do you have a question?
Yeah, we had a couple questions about the summer learning projects. Is that directed to you, Mr. Price?
Yes.
Okay. So, let me just organize my notes here. Just a reminder that in the contract, that the Curriculum Advisory Council, the way it reads, the purpose is that CAC is the major vehicle for curriculum planning and development in District 65. And that CAC receives summer project applications and then makes recommendations to the superintendent. So I'm gonna pass out, we put together a chart. Can I pass that to you? So that there were some questions about some of the projects in the second column. It's the support for the project and then the amount funded. And it was a little unclear because a lot of the support for project for some of them was very low from the teachers on the committee. And in your memo, it said that in making decisions of funding priorities, the team will be looking for projects that facilitate one or more of the following characteristics. And then you listed some bullet points. And I guess we're gonna ask about a couple. If you could speak specifically to the ACC and the ones for Oakton. I think that the comments that I also have the comments that were given for those projects, I think the committee members felt that that while they were great projects, and I can read, these are fabulous projects for the school, but the committee members really felt that those needed to be either more coming from the more school-based funding or district-based, because that summer curriculum projects really should be benefiting more than one school in particular. And so I think there was question here that the teacher support wasn't from the committee, and it wasn't clear on how these were relating to more than one of the following characteristics. So could you maybe clarify that a little bit?
Sure. I think we did look at the feedback that we got from the team. I think some of the questions that we have, there's some of the comments, the one that you read specifically about these should be district funds, not CAC funds.
Or SIT funds or ILT funds, school-based funding?
Right, so I was just gonna, there are no CAC funds. These are all district funds. And so I think the application that we received from Oakton for planning based upon the redesign project, what they're looking for are they were looking for additional funds to continue their planning throughout the school year, because this is an additional project that they've been asked to take on to serve all of the students in the school. And I do believe that there will be lessons learned in this process that will be applicable to other schools across the district. This will lead to, as we move through the process. I don't anticipate that being this initial planning phase this summer, but it will certainly lead to curriculum that will be developed for the school. It will bring together teachers in different roles. It does target groups of students who are most at risk for not meeting standards, and it will certainly utilize technology or have applications for technology implementation that we would anticipate. So I think it does address several of the aspects that we're looking for, and does importantly follow up on work that's been requested and supported by the board and by the superintendent.
Okay.
May can I ask a question just on what you handed out? Just so I understand it. What is this, the column says % strong and rec. What does that mean?
So there were teachers who voted, and so it was saying there was a combination of strongly supported and just supported.
Okay,
And
so this
that
is
was-
based on this, just the teachers on CAC, not teachers at large or any other form, but it's, okay.
So it was the percentage of teacher support is the what, my little note. And this was, yeah. So again, in your memo, several other important projects proposed were not funded out of funds set aside for summer professional learning and will be funded from other funding sources. This is on page 147.
Right.
Can you tell us what projects those are and how those will be funded?
Yeah, so the majority of the projects that I'm referring to there are either projects out of literacy or the English learner or bilingual department. And we felt like it was important to make sure that take advantage of the opportunity to work with teachers and share everything that we're thinking about doing this summer in an effort to be as transparent as possible. So a lot of those were some of the, specifically the literacy projects. Stacy can speak more specifically to them if you'd like. There are professional dollars set aside, I believe, in Title II to support professional learning specifically that we can use to support the literacy framework development work that we have to do over the summer. But we didn't want to hold back on those or not present those to CAC as well. So all of those projects were presented, even though the dollars set aside specifically for summer professional learning did not necessarily need to be implicated.
Meg, just a good example of that one would be the proposal that we put forward about having teachers work with us collaboratively over the summer to develop the professional learning plan for the literacy framework. And it was our thinking that this was an important piece of work and important for CAC to be able to hear that opportunity, because we think that it really adds value to the planning for the framework forward. It didn't receive very strong support from CAC. I still am committed to keeping collaboration involved in that process, and so, we decided that we would use some funds from, I believe it is Title II, to be able to continue with that work.
So specifically with the global studies at Rhodes, they have a global studies committee in their building. Has that committee been meeting at all this year, and how is that committee work different or related with what this project is here?
Yeah, so yes, that committee has been meeting. And I've got it on my calendar to go visit with that committee coming up. I think what's different here is that this is specifically focused on curriculum development and align with the global studies.
So isn't that what that committee in that building does, though?
No, that may be one part of what they do, but they're also looking at integrating the global studies theme throughout the school, not just curriculum specifically. So I think what Lauren Norwood is presenting for the summer project is specifically a review and a look at curriculum to align with the global studies theme. That's just one aspect of how a theme might impact a school.
Okay, I think, part of, what Deck's concern is that 20% of the budget for summer curriculum is only going to one building. 30% of this budget is only going to 2 buildings. So I think, that's one huge concern.
And Meg, when you said the definition earlier of summer learning projects to impact all building, where does that come from? Is that in the contract? That's the way it's?
That was in
Part of the memo.
Mr. Price's
sorry.
memo.
Okay.
So that was one of the characteristics that he mentioned, so that's not
I thought you were saying
my-
that it was a requirement.
No.
contractual requirement.
Nope, that was one of his, the team will be looking at projects to facilitate one or more. So that wasn't mine,
right.
but I think when CAC, if I were to read some of the comments of some of the teachers, that when they were voting, they, you know, I support this school, but summer curriculum money should be spent on projects that benefit all schools. So if you look at some of the teacher support or lack of support for the projects, it's because of this should be going to all sports. So here's global studies. I don't support this. This is awful lot of money that would benefit only one school. I would support something that is more equitable to all departments and schools. So again, if you're looking for support from CAC, CAC is looking for things that are going to benefit. I'm just reading you a few. I could keep going if you want.
No, that's okay.
You know, and I think, you know, DEC is concerned that you've got a lot of projects that are being 100% funded with only 60% support. 100% funded with only 47% support. So, you know, I mean, I think DEC is a little concerned at, if we're looking at, this is a vehicle for curriculum planning and we're looking at teachers making recommendations, we understand that, you know, the superintendent has the, but I think we're not clear on.
You're really asking how, I think what's being asked here is how important was the teacher support to you in making your final determinations?
We went through and weighed that input on every single proposal. And I think on, you know, the specific issue of the TWE students working together, it came from a teacher. It got 47% strong support. It was $800. I think specifically with the global studies, the request amount was $9,600. That was cut to $3,600 to be in line with the Oakton proposal. I think, I'm not sure exactly, but I think Meg's referring to also to the ACC, the Oakton project support. It's $4,200. That was discussed for a long time, and ultimately we funded that at the full amount. We certainly discussed the teacher feedback as well, and that's because that aligns specifically to one of our strategic planning core strategies of culturally relevant pedagogy. So we felt like we certainly did take into account all of the teacher input that we got. We also took into account the project proposals, how they align to the strat plan, and how they align to the criteria that were set forth here. So all of those things were carefully considered. There's no formula, though.
Just sharing our concerns.
In the past, have there been school-specific projects during the summer, or is this sort of unprecedented where the money's going to school?
This is a little more unusual.
And you're pointing at the school-specific ones.
Correct.
Yeah.
And are there guidelines for whether it has to be across the district or whether it can be school-specific?
Nope, there's no guidelines for it.
I think
Teachers
it's
can
just the-
present.
It's just
Her point was
Yeah,
just
no,
in
I
the
know.
memo, it says multiple schools.
It says one or more. of
Teachers
these
can present
criteria.
whatever they
And
want,
that's one
but
of them,
it's, you
correct.
know, again, I think in the past,
Make sure we're.
in the past, there has been a little bit more alignment with teacher recommendation from CAC.
I think the issue around the individual school proposals that were supported is that, and again, we went through these very carefully, and we also thought about the precedent that we might be setting and what type of precedent would we want to be setting for individual school proposals. And what's coming forward is not a school proposal to develop a reading curriculum. So we're not going to develop, necessarily a reading curriculum at one school. We want to make sure that's, but we have schools that have brought forward magnet schools that have brought forward proposals to support their magnet programs, and that we do feel like is sustainable and supportable, and we're comfortable, we being the curriculum instruction team, based upon the teacher feedback, the direction we get from Dr. Gorn, we are comfortable with that as a precedent of schools. I mean, that's the only way would be an individual school proposal, would be to support a magnet theme. So that's the only way that those programs would be supported is as individual schools, because King is one school, Oakton is one school, Rhodes is one school.
Would
So
you-
that's why those
yeah.
feel different than a school saying, we want to develop our own math curriculum, for example.
Would you entertain a school-specific outside a magnet school that had not a specific curriculum project that would distinguish it from the curriculum across the district, but something that the school wanted to develop in terms of culture, or I don't know what it would be, but are you saying it can only be for magnets, or could it be for any specific school?
No, I think we entertained and discussed at length every single project that was brought forward. So certainly we would entertain it. I think in terms of the specific concerns that Meg is raising on behalf of DEC, I think part of the reason why these receive funding and funding at the levels they received, which is significant, is because these are magnet programs, and we do feel like it's sustainable, as we said, to do that on a regular basis, if those projects continue to come forward.
I think another criteria, though, is the extent to which the work that can be done can also spread throughout the district. And so as we think about the global studies theme and the African Center curriculum as part of culturally relevant curricula, the question is how do we make those investments, and then how do we actually show what the work that is being done can actually be applicable across the district in different schools.
Is that part of what you're definitely going to be looking at?
It's what I'm interested in at the Oakton and the Bessie Rhodes piece. So yes,
So that's going to be then transferring to other schools, is what I hear you saying?
the culturally relevant curricula. Part of the work and part of the planning work, especially at Oakton, is to develop the type of curricular program that actually can be used elsewhere in the schools. In the schools, not just in Oakton.
I think there's all of the projects are presented at another CAC meeting that we have in the fall. So all of the projects are brought back to the entire CAC, and the second half of the payment is not paid until the project is complete. So those are two ways that we try to create a process for process and ideas to be shared across the district.
Just to offer,
So, but that doesn't say that in here.
Well, I think Dr. Gorin's point is that in the larger scheme, not necessarily that this particular project is about how do we spawn this in other places, because it has to be done well first in one place to then be able to replicate it. But so I don't know that the project for the summer, maybe it is, maybe it's not, the definition isn't this project is about how do you replicate this elsewhere. This project is about how do you build this curriculum for Oakton, for instance. But part of the overarching thing is our culturally responsive pedagogy for all schools, and can we learn from that? So I wouldn't think it would be articulated in that particular, right? Because that's where the strategic plan speaks to culturally responsive curricula across the entire district, and are there learnings from the ACC program that can then be shared across the district, or models or practices. We don't know that yet until we first formulate it for ACC. So we can then learn.
But the proposal is very specific to an ACC curriculum. It's not something that's just merely culturally sensitive or culturally responsive. It's very specific to ACC.
Right.
And so I'm not sure how that.
Well, the underpinnings of that are going to, I'm not famous, I guess.
Doing great, yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
I'm not an educator, but I play one on TV. The underpinnings of that are, I think the foundational culturally responsive pedagogy that would potentially look different in other programs, but there are foundational components that could be learnings to take to other programs. Is that fair?
That's our objective.
Okay. Although I'm not seeing it in the proposal as written.
But I think Candace's point is you can't see that in the proposal, because the proposal has to be specific.
So what I'm hearing, though, is that it didn't need to be in the proposal, that it was funded based off the team's understanding of that's where it would go.
Yeah, I don't think we communicated in our requests for proposals that proposals specifically address a plan for scaling across the district.
Right, but what I hear is that's why it got funded. Because you're saying it met that criteria because it can go out.
It can go out, and it's aligned well to an aspect of our strategic plan.
So I would say then that was a little misleading to people who put forth a plan. If theirs didn't get funded because it didn't meet that requirement, that might have been a little misleading to teachers if that's why theirs didn't get funded, because it didn't meet this criteria of needing to bring together from multiple schools, because it wasn't going to ultimately be able to meet multiple schools on that level. That may have been a little misleading.
But that's just one criteria.
Yeah.
It says here that it's projects that
I'm
facilitate
just
one or
bringing
more.
up a point.
So-
If that's what may have gotten that particular one funded in more bullet points than another, and I didn't know that I needed to make mine more accessible to multiple schools, and that's what got that one funded, because ultimately it will be more culturally available to other schools. Was that made clear to people?
In addition to, I don't understand your point, I'm sorry, Meg. I mean, we tried to make it clear that sharing across multiple schools is a criteria, and that's the bullet point that you're referring to. And I don't see an example of a project that was not funded because it was not scalable across schools.
Well, you don't have any of the projects not funded here, do you?
Yeah. There is a transitional
There are
math,
zeros and zeros.
And
yeah.
some of those I would just
writing,
note.
reading, literacy, professional.
Some of those I would just note, and the entire discussion is not here, but some of those ones that were not funded, we felt like worked very well with some of the other projects, so we saw some opportunities to combine. And so Lauren Leitao, as we offer applications to work on this, we saw some opportunities where a project for special education students and supporting the math curriculum and EL students supporting the math curriculum, those projects really would be great together. And so just, if I can find it quickly, there was a project, the EM4 Special Ed RTI, 1, 2, 3, 4 was funded at higher than what was expected or what was requested, because we were going to wrap that in with another project that got at 0 funding. And we saw that as an opportunity to bring those two projects together. So overall, less funding than what was requested for the two together. But we saw just a great synchronicity there in those two projects working together. So some of the decisions were a little bit more nuanced than what you see in the report here.
I was just going to add, thank you for the explanations.
Sure.
And thank you for raising the questions. In terms of Oakton, I think, in my view, I look at it as an exception. I think it aligns to some of the bullets here, like teachers across different roles, and certainly targeting groups of students who are most at risk. But all of the programming there is under a very intentional review that is different than anywhere else in the district. So I understand that. When I looked at this in the packet, I did have the same question about the global studies, and that it was 10% of the overall funding. And it's been, that one stood out because, especially if we're talking about applying across other schools. And it's supposed to be a theme that is unique to Rhodes.
Right.
That's what makes it special as a magnet school, is it's focused on global studies. I don't see how that then transfers. I mean, I think we could talk conceptually, of course it could, but I just think the likelihood of that happening is really low. I wasn't even really going to say anything, but since Meg raised what I think were, some good questions to raise, I just thought I would add that.
And I would have to concur with what Richard's saying. I think that some of these are specific to schools. It really won't, even though, they just won't translate. And I don't think there was necessarily intention.
Well, I was thinking specifically the ACC program, there isn't some intention. And I think it would be awfully odd. I mean, we committed as a board, right, when we heard the presentation, we are not going to let the same thing happen again as that happened before, that we won't put resources to actually making this happen. So we need to do that. and this is one vehicle to do that.
Yep.
So. Okay. So our next meeting is May 9th If there aren't any other questions about the FYI, did you have?
I had one other
Sorry.
question, just because we all received an email as a board about a middle school teacher, a PE teacher, who was wanting to revisit BMI with some new research and questioning whether or not it was being used, and that whether we were gleaning any useful information or whether it was working to weigh all the middle school students. And she was wondering in the curriculum review whether that would be incorporated into looking at that. And I just thought, for Open Meetings Act, I didn't want to do this behind the scenes, but we should decide whether, first of all, know whether there's a role for that this summer, and if not, whether that's something that we would talk about. Because she sent a lot of information, a lot of research for us. I don't know if anyone else in the
Would you
staff.
forward it to me?
Sure.
Yeah,
Great.
I haven't seen it.
Happy to take a look at it and talk with the
Yeah.
department chair about the project.
Yeah, because there's sort of a question of information that was supposed to be helpful, was supposed to be brought back to us. I don't think we've seen anything in a couple of years, so I think that's her concern.
Is that project the actual review of PE? That it's different than the full review, curriculum review?
That's correct.
Okay. That's what's my question. Okay. All right, so,
I will forward that to you all, and you can let us know whether that's something that she would be able to explore within this project, or whether we would want to talk about the information she sent us independent from that.
or if it folds into the larger
Yeah.
curriculum review
Yeah.
of PE, which is next year, right? So,
Yeah, I'm checking the timing.
I
on
think
those
it
right
was,
Oh, yeah, okay. That might be the
so
place
that
for
might,
it.
that might be a place for it as well. Okay, so our next meeting will be May 9th. I'm sure we'll have another action items, but one of the major discussions will be around 2016-17 budget development update, right? And unless there's any other business before this committee, I will call us adjourned at 9:06. Thank you.